let me explain exactly how the neurology and the psychology of cocaine addiction through nasal ingestion actually work. When you do a line of you know what, within 5 to 10 minutes, this hits your brain. It releases a huge surge of dopamine. That dopamine hits your synaptic cleft. However, your synaptic cleft becomes overloaded. It doesn't have the room to deal with the quantity of dopamine that's suddenly being introduced into your brain. So what does it do? It turns down your receptors that actually produce your own level of dopamine. Now, the next time you do a line, the same thing happens. You get a huge surge of dopamine, and your brain says, oh my gosh, there's way too dopamine, too much for me to deal with. I'm going to turn down my own receptors that produce dopamine so that I no longer produce the same quantity of dopamine. Think about your brain having like a dual carriageway. And in this dual carriageway, it can only contain so many cars. The natural dopamine that you produced prior to using, let's say it was 2 cars, or ADHD, 1 car. And that's the level of dopamine in a 2-lane dual carriageway. But when you do a line of you know what, you introduce like 6 trucks. There's not enough room on your dual carriageway. And that's why your brain, to protect you, turns down your receptors that produce your own amount of dopamine. Now let's fast forward this, having used a month, 2 months, a year, whatever, it's different rates for different people. Now each time it's turned down your own natural receptors and you're producing less and less dopamine. Now remember, dopamine is the neurotransmitter chemical that sends a signal to your brain that tells you something felt good and to repeat it. Now, if you're not naturally now producing any dopamine of your own because your receptors have turned it down so much, the only time that you're getting dopamine, the chemical that tells you that something feels good and to repeat it, the accelerator of pleasure of your brain, if you like, is when you have an external source using your line of you know what. That means the only time you have the feel-good chemical is when you do a line. So everything else in life now becomes boring and dull because you don't have any dopamine in order to tell you that something feels good. At the same time this is happening, it's turning down the prefrontal cortex by shrinking it. Whenever you do a line of you know what, it shrinks your prefrontal cortex. Now your prefrontal cortex contains within it the part of your brain that controls your impulsivity. If it shrinks it, it makes you more impulsive. If you're more impulsive, you're more likely to use again. Not only that, it shrinks your grey matter in your prefrontal cortex. Your grey matter deals with your rationale. No, I shouldn't use. No, it's affecting my life. No, it's costing me money. Your buffer, your brakes. Now remember, every time you do a line, it's shrinking your prefrontal cortex. It's shrinking your brain's brakes. Your ability to say, hold on, what am I actually doing? So your tolerance goes up, your quantity goes up. And by now, the amount of influx of dopamine is overstimulated your salience network. Now, in your salience network are 2, like doormen we'll call them, okay? The anterior insula is one of them, and its job is to scan your body and your mind for your emotions. The other one in there deals with your feelings, and it deals with your, how do I explain this? It deals with your what's important to you, what's important to you at that moment in time, what's salient, because it's in the salience network, okay? So let's say you're scrolling, for example, that becomes compulsive, that becomes important to your brain. That's why you end up scrolling for hours and hours. But it also becomes salient to be compulsive to repeat the process. And so that in itself is driving the behavior to use more. That's happening on a neurological level. And that dopamine is turned down for a long period of time. That's why when people try and stop and life seems boring and dull and has no interest, it's because you're no longer producing the dopamine, because your receptors have turned down the quantity you produce to protect you. While all that's happening on a neurological level, look at the psychological levels, the stimuli of going out with your mates, the associations, the places you go to, the boredom factor, your emotional factor. And put all that together, you have a highly addictive, and that is why the neurology and psychology must be addressed if you are serious about wanting to stop permanently. What's that about?